Hi, and welcome everybody to episode 169 of the Childless Not by Choice podcast. My name is Civilla Morgan. My mission is to recognize and speak to the childless not by choice women and men around the world, reminding us that we can live joyful, relevant, fulfilled, childless not by choice lives. And of course, whether you have children or not, thank you for tuning in. So guess what? This is the January episode. We are recording well before that, but this is the January 2025 episode. And I am so excited because this year we have a guest. And as many of you know, for the last few years, we've had a guest on the first month of a new year, except for 2023. And we all know why that didn't happen. So I'm glad to be back to normal. Yes, I do still think of my dad. I miss him immensely. And that's why we didn't have a guest episode last year, because I was dealing with his loss. But we are back to normalish and we have a guest, and I am so excited because today we are going to be speaking with one Mrs. Bindi Shah. So before we start our conversation with Bindi, I wanted to, of course, thank my Patreon contributors, the people who make a monthly financial contribution to the platform. And I also want to thank those who give once in a while gifts or one-time gifts. All of it is appreciated. Thank you. If you want to get set up for giving, all of the information is in the show notes. I won't even go over that right now. It's in the show notes. As I always ask, please, please, please check out the show notes. Everything you need to know for the episode is in there. So without further ado, I want to go through Bindi's bio with you, just give you some highlights, and then we're going to get to talking, and then you'll learn more about her and wonder why I never had her on the show before, because I wonder too. So Bindi Shah is a meditation guide and writer who teaches meditation classes and writing workshops for the involuntary childless community. She says, in meditation, you move inwards, which is a tender place to be. I want childless not by choice women to feel comfortable as they meditate and to be with others who understand their story, unquote. Writing is a huge part of her healing journey. She wrote words to help her understand her emotions when she was in deep despair. These words later formed her first book of poetry, The Eyes of Time. This healing writing inspires her Right to Heal workshops. Bindi's empathy for the childless community comes from her own multi-layered experience, which we will be talking about in a few minutes, including adenomyosis. I know some of us pronounce it adenomyosis. I think either pronunciation is fine. It's adenomyosis or adenomyosis that led to a hysterectomy. Her work revolves around empowering and supporting others through meditation and writing. She continues to expand her work within the childless community and has recently started a healing space for women of color who are also childless not by choice. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bindi, for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time. How are you doing?
Oh my goodness, Civilla. Thank you for inviting me here and listening to all of that. You know, when you listen back to the things that you do, the things that you've accomplished, it's really emotional as well. Yeah, I'm doing well. And yeah, thank you for having me here. And I'm also one of your listeners. I love the podcast. So
Thank you.
thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in. So I think what made me ask you onto the show and wonder why I had never asked you before was this most recent World Childless Week, which many of us in the childless not by choice space, we know is a week in September when we all get together from around the world and we make contributions to the World Childless Week platform. So your contributions were video messages on meditation, amongst other things, but I tuned into one of your meditations and I was like, wow, this is so calming and encouraging. And so I sat there and just listened through the whole thing. I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm like, why did I never have her on? And wow, we can do this on my. Okay, anyway, we'll talk about that later. I don't want to go ahead of myself about what the plans you and I have. So anyway, thank you for taking the time to speak to the Childless Not by Choice podcast listeners. I want to give you the opportunity to tell us as much or as little as you feel comfortable in sharing about your childless not by choice journey, including the adoption process, if you want to talk about it, that you and your husband Jay went through.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So yeah, as I always say, my childless not by choice reasons or experience of life is multi-layered. So there is not one reason. And actually, when I see, people in the community, it's really, really common that there isn't one reason. Like sometimes we think there's one reason or perhaps one main reason, but there are so many different layers to life and how life has brought us here to being childless, not a choice. So we can start at the start, which is always a good place. I would say in my 20s, I was in relationships, but my relationships were non-committal. So I call them non-committal. So it's like you're dating someone or seeing someone, even for years, but there's no real commitment. And by that, I mean really to get married. So to have, to be married. So for me, my bringing a child into the world was always going to be within a relationship and within a strong, hopefully strong marriage. That was the way, I saw it. And I know sometimes that sounds really traditional now or kind of like a little bit old fashioned, but that was, what was how I saw it. And that was kind of my truth around what I wanted a family to look like. So I went through these non-committal relationships which didn't lead to that engagement or marriage. And then when I did find my now husband, Jay, we were both a little bit older. I mean, I say that now, but when I look back, we've just celebrated our 17th year anniversary, wedding anniversary. So when I look back on it now, I think we weren't that young, but fertility wise, or we weren't that old, I should say, but fertility wise, we really were. So we were already mid-30s. So it was that kind of feeling of, oh, it's going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. And then it doesn't. It came up that I had a lot of issues with my periods and with my menstrual cycle. And sometimes now I wonder whether it was also kind of perimenopausal as well. But there was lots and lots of issues and went to the doctors, as we all do, and got the diagnosis of adenomyosis. So that was 2013. So it feels so long ago now, actually. And even getting to the diagnosis, so I know those of you who have been through endometriosis and adenomyosis know that, getting to the diagnosis, first of all, can be a good few years. So I think this was about 4 or 5 years to get to the diagnosis. And then having it, the doctors not really knowing that much about it, I would say, or not that they wanted to perhaps share. But with my diagnosis, what was really interesting was that in no conversation did they say this would be affecting my fertility and affecting us going on to have a child. Like, really, they were like, I don't know. I don't know if perhaps they didn't know or they didn't want to say. But, they knew we were trying for a child and did not want to share that information for whatever reason, or perhaps didn't have that information. So that was really interesting because I didn't think that there would be a problem, even with adenomyosis. And now I know that it's a big reason that people haven't been able to have a child. But at that time, I didn't really think about it. But what happens with adenomyosis is your cycles are not they're not there. So you have longer cycles of bleeding. You have less time when you're not bleeding, less time to dry. Half the time I didn't know whether I was ovulating or not. There was a lot of things there that was so uncertain. So it didn't happen. During my adenomyosis, I was actually prescribed with a synthetic progesterone, which is normal to stop the bleeding, to kind of like make you have a proper cycle. And what happened with that is that really affected me, the progesterone, the hormone. And in the end, when we stopped kind of realizing that, this was not happening, IVF or anything like that was not an option for me because of my reaction to the progesterone. So my reaction was around my moods, around anxiety, depression. It was really, really bad. So we knew then that we wouldn't be able to progress to that kind of, that treatment because of what the hormones were doing for me. So it was at that point that then we thought, or even a little bit after that, it's also really funny when I look back and I'm looking back at what was going on with me, Civilla. And I don't know if you do this as well, but you look back and you think, oh my gosh, there was all of these things going on. And ultimately, so much of my life was kind of devoted or dedicated to having a family. And even now, when I'm talking to you and I'm looking back, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's, I can remember how I was feeling, what I was thinking of, and how difficult it was. So a little bit of time after that, around the adenomyosis and knowing that there's things going on, this is not working, my husband and I, we spoke about adoption. And for me, adoption was always something I wanted to do. Like, if I think now back to my late teens, early 20s, this was always something that I had such, I don't know whether to call it a desire, but such a kind of feeling to adopt. So I used to do charity work in India. My parents and mostly my mom they have a charity. And so this was way back late 1989, 1990. And this charity was set up to help people in India, to help in the villages. It was a time in India of huge poverty. So I would go and help my mom and, help the charity. And I always saw the children there and things. And I just had this kind of feeling in me that, one day I want to adopt. Like, this was my thing. And then it stayed with me through the years, but I didn't necessarily think about it that much. And then when it came to not being able to birth a child, Jay and I spoke and I said, how about going down the adoption process? What does this look like for us? Is this something for us? And he was also very, very excited by it and thinking, yes, like, we want a family. And we weren't necessarily looking for mini-me's, if that makes sense. We were more looking for the nurturing aspect and wanting to nurture children, a child. So we did go down the adoption process, and that was very, very difficult and very tough. We went into it with different eyes, different life, and then we came out on the other end with our eyes open to another world. I always say we were very naive. We were very naive going into it, and it opened us up. It made us realize a lot of hard truths and hard facts around living in a life or in a country, I should say, where you are not the dominant type or race. So I'm of Indian heritage, as is my husband. And it was a really, really difficult process because it opened us up to realizing how deep these biases are. And that's why I say we were naive, because yes, they were there before that as well. But I guess we were put into a situation where it opened us up to that, which was extremely difficult. And also the whole process was, oh my goodness. And, I say that the whole process was hard and difficult. And also I realized that it needs to be as well. Like, there needs to be a good system in place so that the people who are putting themselves forward to be parents of children will be the very best that they can be as well. So I understand around the process. And I never shied away from that. And we were like there for all of the interviews and the training and, bringing our whole selves into everything and really wanting this as much for the child as for us. We're like, yes, we want to be the best that we can possibly be. But that I feel it was more the system, that more kind of the deep-seated
Bias.
way, the bias. Yes, the bias, the way of the system, which really broke us. I mean, that's the only word I can use. It broke us. It was so taxing on our marriage. Sometimes I wonder how we are still together, and it really, really broke us. And it took a lot of rebuilding, a lot of healing and rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that with us. I know that that's going to really make a lot of our listeners realize that they see the similarities, because I saw a lot of similarities as I listened to you. I heard a lot of similarities. I think I was probably on that same medication you were talking about, because that medication put me into, I always tell people I had two menopauses. I had a natural one, and I'm probably still in it, to be honest. And then I had what I call the man-made one. And the man-made one was that medication. And I'm telling you, the natural one is a piece of cake compared to those injections. They came in either a 90-day, was it? Yeah, you could do it either every 90 days or every 6 months. I don't know if that's the one that you had, but I tried both. And then I finally told my doctor, you know what? Let's stop now, because
Yeah.
I don't like how I'm feeling. It was terrible. It
Yeah.
was terrible. I'm going to admit to the world right now that there were times when I felt like I could commit murder.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrible. I was like, I don't like the level of anger that I felt when I was on this medication. And I know it was supposed to stop the bleeding. I had fibroids.
Mm-hmm.
My issue was fibroids. And another thing you said, it's not just one thing that makes us childless, because I had the fibroids, but I also couldn't meet Mr. Right. There was one close call. We had dated for about 2 years, but then he backed out. He said he wasn't ready. So I dropped him, because that's Civilla. Why waste time? You just wasted my time. Goodbye. Click. So it's like, I wasn't meeting the right man. I wanted to be in a committed marriage. Something else you said. I wanted to be in a strong, committed marriage. I didn't think I could raise a child on my own. Kudos to the ladies out there who are doing it. I'm
Yeah.
not mad at you, but I just didn't think I could do it. And so I thought about it, but I made the decision that I could not. So waiting for Mr. Right on this medication that made me feel like I was crazy and losing my mind, and then dealing with all the bleeding from the fibroids and all of the craziness, the 3 myomectomies before I finally had a hysterectomy. And as you said again, you look back, although your experience is going to be different because you're looking back with your husband. I'm looking back on my own, and I'm like,
Mhm.
that was a lot.
Yeah.
That was a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot. And I think the medication, very, very similar. Mine was in tablet form. So I guess
Oh.
in tablet form injections, but they really want you to take it and to have it in you. And it was not good. It was not good. And I also had a hysterectomy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this was after the adoption process had they didn't want to take us forward, basically. So we'd gone through all of the interviews and everything, and then we weren't taken forward, completely broke me. And then I still had to deal with the adenomyosis. I still
Mm-hmm.
had to deal with it all
Mm-hmm.
until I think it was 3 years after I also had a hysterectomy as well. And that was after Sevilla,
Mm-hmm.
after 200 days of non-stop bleeding. And
Wow.
200 days, I had it all in my diary every day. It didn't stop. It didn't stop. It didn't stop.
Wow.
And also, I had to have a blood transfusion as well along the way, because obviously you're losing a lot of blood and you're, completely anemic,
Mm-hmm.
completely weak. Yeah, I was pretty much housebound because I didn't know when there would be the flooding or when it would just be a little bit of blood. So I didn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything really. It was the time that I was away from my work. So I had to give up a lot of my work actually to deal with the health and also to deal with my childless grief. Yeah, I was pretty much just trying to take each day at a time and get through until I could get a hysterectomy date.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of similarities as I listen. A lot of
Mm,
similarities. I did try to adopt too, but on my end, it was, I think they completely ignored me because I was single. So
mm,
that's
mm.
still a thing. So this may be personal and tell me if it is, but when you were trying to adopt, were you trying to adopt within the UK or were you trying to adopt in India? I wasn't really clear.
Yeah, so we were trying, no, it was within the UK.
Okay.
Yeah, and we didn't necessarily think about international adoption.
Hmm.
We were going through the process. So there's a process here that you go through. Even if you want to do an international one, you still need to go through the process here as well,
Hmm.
like up to a point. So we actually didn't think about that. We thought, okay, we're going to do it here. And yeah, which also brought up a lot of interesting things because one of the reasons that they said that they were not taking us forward
Hmm.
was that there are no children or there aren't enough children. And anyone going through the system knows that, yes, there are
Of course.
the children. Yeah, yeah. And then it was only really after that, on reflection and thinking about it, I was thinking, there weren't any children perhaps of our heritage.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings up things because, children of color, of different heritage are adopted by white parents, like quite frequently as
All the
well,
time.
all the time. Yeah. So it brought up another kind of nuanced view of, oh, I see. Like, we're not necessarily good enough to adopt all children, perhaps,
Hmm.
like because the child that they have in their mind around who is fitting to be in our family is different to who they have. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers to everything.
Oh yeah, there are. And I thought about that too as you were talking about, you said that, that you were naive. And I'm thinking, I think we're all naive when we go into a new
Mm,
endeavor. I
yeah.
think that's just how it is. I think the naivete is what protects us, at least in the beginning, until we realize what's really happening. That's my opinion when it comes to naivete and new endeavors. But thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. And I know, like I said, I know there are going to be at least some listeners who are going to really just understand and have probably been through something similar. Kind of pivoting a little bit, I read the poem you wrote when you were 17,
Yeah.
Belonging. Reading that poem and then listening to your husband's YouTube video. And let me pause there for just a moment, you guys. I put the links in the show notes, but one of the videos that I watched, the meditation video, was it that one? I was it? I don't remember. There was a video where you and your husband were on the same video.
Yes, so that was right. So one of the days for this year for World
Mhm.
Childless Week was the Childless People of Color Day.
Okay.
And it was there that we were on a webinar. So
Okay.
Jay's name is Jay Palmer. I did
Hmm.
not take his name. So, I was being myself within that. So yeah, we're on a webinar together. So that is actually on the Childless People of Color Day within the
Okay.
World Childless Week website, but it's a webinar.
Okay, so that I'm 99% sure that link is in the show notes because I took the links that you sent me and
Mhm,
I put them all, I listened to them, I watched them, and then I put them in the show notes. But I just wanted to pause, and I've already told you this, Bindi, but
mhm.
in that video, you guys, Bindi said earlier that she's just still surprised sometimes that their marriage made it and all that kind of stuff. Let me tell you, you have got to go look at that video because the way he looked at her when they were on that video, when I think you were going to introduce him or he introduced, I don't remember what it was, but the way he looked at you, Bindi, I was like, oh my gosh. My heart melted. Like I mean, that it was so beautiful. It was, and I told you about it. I remember message. I think I messaged you or posted in the chat.
Mhm.
That was, wow. That melted my heart. I don't even know your husband. I'm like, keep him, keep him. It was beautiful. It was just beautiful. And I would tell everybody to go, of course, listen and watch the video, but look at how the way he looks at her in that video. Now everybody's going to run to the video.
Yeah, you wrote it. I think you wrote it on the video on the YouTube. And it actually meant so much to me as well, because I think when you've been married for a while. And especially when you've been through a lot of things together, which, most marriages would have been, it helps that kind of that self-reflection piece again, like, looking back and seeing, going and seeing the way he looked, like, because you saw that. So in a way, it was like you were a mirror for me to see it as well. Because I think when when you're with someone for so long as well, it can be hard to remind yourself about those kind of, those things.
And keeping in mind, I had, I knew nothing of your, the background and everything you guys had been through and all of that. I knew nothing. All I knew was I was looking at the video. And so I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. So anyway, I hope everybody takes a look and listen at the links that I put in the show notes. But, as I was saying that, I read the poem and then I listened to your husband's video. I think the same video no, it was his own video on YouTube that he created for World Childless Week. And I remember thinking how he so beautifully tied the challenges of being brown and, in the case of Benjamin Zephaniah, being Black, so beautifully together. It made me recognize something that is true worldwide, kind of what we've been talking about, that no matter where in the world we live as brown and Black people, we are instantly prejudged by our color.
Yeah.
And I find it so frustrating. So I just wondered, and we've been kind of talking about it. I feel sometimes that we have to always be proving ourselves, that despite our race or color, that we have to somehow prove ourselves. And I personally, I used to feel like I had to make people feel comfortable with me being in the room or at the table. And I've stopped that. I have completely stopped that. I was made in the image of God, just like everybody else. We all were. And I'm not going to explain my existence or try to make you feel comfortable with me sitting at the same table that you are. And I just wondered, how you feel about that, if you've had any similar, or if it even sounds familiar to you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think at this point, any Black, brown woman of color that you ask would say yes. Yes. There are so many rooms, so many situations that we go into where we are judged, or there is that bias that comes in, because the first thing that people see is the color of our skin. That's the first thing that people see before you open your mouth, before you say anything. And I think that it's a really, really big thing. Yeah, if we go back a little bit with my childlessness actually also opened me up to looking at my identity, my racial identity. And I didn't know ever that it would do that, and how it did it, I still don't know. But for some reason, looking at my childlessness and looking at my identity have come together and merged. So a lot of the time, a lot of my healing around childlessness is also my healing around my identity. And by that, I mean the identity of someone of color who's actually born in a country where that is not the predominant color. So I'm thinking really of the Western world, where, here in the UK, I'm seen as a minority, so an ethnic minority of the country. But I'm born here, and, and the whole colonial journey and the empire journey and, all of that comes in with that. But I've really started to learn more and speak up more, because I've also started to speak up about my childlessness. And for some reason, they've both merged together and allowed me to speak up about my whole truth. So things like around who I am as a woman of color also impacts the way my childlessness has been. So if we take the example of that non-committal relationships and things, one of my things around especially parental pressures and things was around getting married. That was a big thing for me growing
Mhm.
up, huge thing. And I do think that is a heritage thing. That is something that all Indian parents want for their children. And, that's a big kind of thing around marriage. So I, started to hear it from my late teens, really going
Mhm.
all the way, all the way in my 20s, in my 30s. So things like that. And that is also something that perhaps not everyone would understand, unless you are, I feel, of color, or at least the different heritages, the different, parts of that. So
Yeah, it's in our Caribbean heritage as well. Actually, I didn't say that part, but one of the reasons that I asked the person I had been dating for 2 years, what are our next steps, what's going on, where do you see us, etc., was because my dad said, "So, what's going on over there?"
yeah, yeah,
And I was like, oh boy, here we go. I'm on a time clock now because it has been 2 years. I wondered, but I was afraid to ask. But then my dad was like, okay, what's going on? It's been 2 years. What's happening? So I felt like I had to ask him what was going on, and that's when he told me. And there are two things that I cannot tolerate. Well, there's a handful of things I can't tolerate, but two of them are deception
mm,
and wasting my time. It's like, please never lie to me and never waste my time. And I felt like he had wasted my time for 2 years, which I kind of had to. It took that time for us to get to know each other. I saw red flags. Honestly, I saw the red flags, but I chose to ignore them. That's why a lot of women end up in the places that they are, bad relationships, bad marriages, that lead to terrible outcomes, because I saw the red flags, but I wanted to be married, to have a child, and my biological clock was ticking, and I was dealing with the fibroids.
yes,
So at any rate, thank God my dad stepped in even in my 30s. Not that he stepped in directly, but he stepped in by asking me what's happening over there
yeah,
and let me handle it. Thankfully, he didn't try to run my life at 30, but thankfully I had a father who had the
yeah,
love and concern and to ask me what's going on. So when he told me he wasn't ready, I was like, okay, well, you know what? Let's just end this now because it's been 2 years. If you're not ready after 2 years, and I hear tell that on average, men know about after 6 months. They know.
yeah.
A lot of them know immediately, I think, but 6 months, they know if this is the person for them or not. And it had been what, a year and a half past that. So I just cut it off.
Yeah. It happens so often. And I always feel it's such a shame, such a real, real shame that a lot of the time women are kept, young women, are
Mhm.
kept hanging on, hanging on, hanging on. And it's like, oh, yes, it's
Mhm.
going somewhere, it's going somewhere. And yeah, it's a real shame. And I think it's so disingenuous of
Mhm.
men. And the other thing is whenever people talk about the fertility rate is going low, or, people aren't having children, or no, women aren't having children. It's always women
Mhm.
who are brought into it. And where is the man in all of this? And so many times, especially within our childless not by choice community, it is the relationship issue. It's the
Mhm.
non-committal, or not finding a partner, or having a partner but then not having the committal around having a child or family or marriage. And so much of our childless not by choice community is this,
Mhm.
it's this type of childlessness. It's by circumstance, by not finding someone. So much of it is due to that. So, and that always makes me a little bit sad, because when I see the women in our community and I hear the stories and I see how amazing and fabulous they are, and I think, wow, that
Mhm.
those men not pursuing, or not, not wanting the next, not wanting the next. And yeah, and I feel also it's a real thing around, our time on earth with our
Okay.
fertility as well is
Our time clock.
a big thing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
our time clock.
So yeah, that's my story, and I can't go back and change anything. I'm just glad I'm honestly glad things didn't work out because I would have probably have been setting some values aside to just,
Mm,
just to be married, to have that child or children that I wanted. And I don't know if it would have,
yeah.
how it would have ended or continued or not or whatever. But I'm just glad that I decided to cut things loose, and I just have to live with where I am now and the life I have. And that's basically what I tell everybody on every single episode, that we can still live our most relevant and joyful life, even if things didn't turn out the way we wanted or expected. And it's not a cop out, because what's the alternative? Life is short, just like you just said, it's short. What are we going to do with it? And I think we should do the best we can. So that's what I'm doing over here. But as we wind things down, I have just a couple more questions. So you kind of mentioned the volunteering in India a little bit ago. So and your mom volunteered at the Mother Teresa Center?
So the Mother Teresa was me. That was
Oh, okay.
yeah. So my mum set up a charity and she
Hmm.
was doing a lot with giving clothes, helping. There were like animal camps to help
Hmm.
the cattle and things, bringing in vets from the bigger town into the villages.
Hmm.
And what my charity or what I did, so this was while I was studying Ayurveda in India. So in 2002, I actually studied Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, and I studied in India. And during my time there, when I was studying, I volunteered at a Mother Teresa center, so an ashram where there were women that had disabilities and their families, I guess, had left them there or
Hmm.
couldn't cope. They don't have a social security system and things like that there. So they were there. They call them desolate women, which I don't necessarily like that term, but that is the term that they use. And
Hmm.
also there were some orphan girls as well there. So again, especially in traditional Indian households and especially in India, the
Hmm.
male child is always the one who is wanted. So there were orphan girls there as well that again would have been left there. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I was teaching English to the girls and helping out with the women. So helping the nuns out with the women and going and volunteering there. And yeah, it was a really joyful time actually for me. I really enjoyed it and it just brought me so much joy.
So do these centers still exist?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
So this one was where I was studying in Coimbatore, which is southern India, but I
Hmm.
think they're everywhere. So they are part of the bigger center in Calcutta, which, the very famous where Mother Teresa herself was. And these centers are basically her centers. So they are around India. I don't know whether they are worldwide, but
Okay.
definitely in India. Yeah.
Okay. When I read that, I was like, that's pretty cool. You had the opportunity and experience to do that. So that
Yeah.
was I wanted to talk to you about that. And then lastly, and we kind of talked about this before we started recording, but my last question for you before I let you go is on the Childless Not by Choice Women of Color writing that you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, 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 yes. So I teach Childless Not by Choice meditation classes, and I've been doing this for a few years now. And it's kind of given me this space of healing, providing healing, allowing people to, or women, I should say, so the classes are for women, allowing them to go inwards and really bring out the healing that they need. So recently, I've been thinking, and especially this last year, I've really been working a lot on my own heritage and identity. And I have felt that I've wanted a space similar to my meditation classes, but for women of color who are also childless not by choice. So a space to come together and to meditate. So very similar to the meditation classes, to meditate, to go inwards, to bring out things which need resolving and healing and processing, reflecting on, bringing out those things, writing about it, which is, again, I do Write to Heal workshops, which do very similar to this, writing about the things which are coming up. But also in these healing spaces for women of color, being able to see that there are other women who are thinking similarly who are going through things which are very similar and who are also childless not by choice. So another layer to the childless not by choice life, kind of thinking, yes, the identity piece and how does this relate to me, perhaps living in the UK or in Europe or in the US, where perhaps it wasn't as easy for me to find a partner who understood my culture. So, maybe that was a reason that then I didn't go on to find somebody and then have a family. Or, and I know that you have spoken about this before in a previous podcast as well, Civilla, around the medical system in these countries and how perhaps they don't understand the differences with us as well. So how, and this is really a factual part of it, that Black and brown women will experience more fibroids, more issues with the menstrual cycle, and also living in countries where perhaps they don't understand that, and also where there is that bias going on within the system. So it's more difficult to find the help and to get the help. So kind of having a space where we can talk about childless not by choice, but also that we are a woman of color living this childless not by choice life and bringing in a little bit of healing into that. And because meditation is what I do and what I guide and teach, I thought, okay, I will do it in a meditation space. So we will meditate with this and then we will write and talk about it as well. So yeah, I've had one session so far as we're recording this, which has been, it was so nurturing and so needed. So needed that that you're not alone in whichever part of the childless community you are. You're not alone. There are always people who have some part of your story which is similar. So as we've said here as well, how both of us have very similar, or there's parts of our stories which are similar. That happens in so much of the community. And I wanted to bring that in with the women of color piece as well.
So just to make sure the listeners understand that they can join from anywhere in the world, right?
Yeah, so everything is over Zoom. So I do my classes over Zoom. And this is for my main meditation classes as well. And I love it like that. It means that everyone is at home. They're in their comfort. They come into the virtual space where everyone is childless not by choice. So again, there is comfort in that. And we meditate, we share, we talk. Yeah, sometimes there are tears. Sometimes we don't even talk about childlessness at all. Like, there are themes to the classes. So these are the main meditation classes now with the different themes each week. And yeah, really lovely classes. And even though we don't talk about the childlessness perhaps all the time in the classes, that everyone there is childless, and that is how you all connect together. And then going on the theme of the meditation classes. So we do a lot of letting go. We do a lot of looking at nature themes as well, visualizations, the forgiveness. I think the self-forgiveness is the one that you listen to at World Childless Week. So we do things around forgiveness, affirmations, lots of different things.
So speaking of affirmations, we can announce now that in January, remember we're recording well before January. I'll be honest, we're recording in November, but for January, we are going to have 2 episodes because the one you're listening to now is going to be our first episode, but then the second episode of January is going to be Ms. Bindi Shah doing a meditation for us as we start a new year, right?
Yes. Intentions for the year, and a new year, I feel, is always special. It is special. It's like a nice new notebook, it's
right.
Yeah.
So please be on the lookout for that. Bindi's working on that because that's her recording. And then we're going to post it as an episode. It's going to be an episode. So that's all in her hands. When she's done with it, she's going to send it to me and we're just going to post it as the second episode in January. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I feel like this is going to be a great way to start a new year As many of us know, especially those of us here in the US, it's going to be an interesting year, and we're going to need all the help we can get in making sure that we remain positive and looking forward into the future in a positive way. So I'm looking forward to listening to that as well. And I really thank you for doing that, Bindi. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me. Yeah, I mean, I love guiding meditations, and the more we can bring out that peace and healing into the world is always going to be good. So, yeah, thank you.
No problem. And so just before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to make sure that you say or add to the episode? Make sure everybody has heard everything. I think I have your contact information. I have all the links, like I said, but I have your website address, bindishaw.com, and then your YouTube is Soul Wisdom.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And is that, if there's anything else, of course, please send it to me, but that's what I have for your contact information. And then all the links with you and your husband and all the World Childless Week links, the YouTube links, they're all in the show notes, everybody. Please check out the show notes. Anything else that you'd like to add before we close out?
I was going to add, so you spoke about the belonging piece and the belonging and the poem. I don't know whether you want me to read out the poem or to let people find it within it was the morning webinar, I think, in World Childless Week.
Yeah, I do have the link here. I would just ask everybody to just make sure to read it. I've got all the links, and of course, if there are even more links, be sure to send them. I have your husband's link, and I have it under Jay Palmer's words, and in parentheses I put Bindi's husband, and then I have Bindi Shah's words, and I have all the links, including the one for belonging.
Perfect.
Yeah. Bindi, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm so looking forward to this episode airing, and of course for the second episode of January to air to just help us all. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.